Hi everyone. So welcome, and I'm Giuseppe from Impact Revolution, and today I will be moderating our third panel as part of Plastic Mountains. So the topic of today is the relationship between plastics and the environment. It is a very broad topic. We will not cover all of it, but we will definitely get some interesting insights. So for those who do not know already, Plastic Mountain itself is a project in which a group of our members, is hiking over the Alps, wearing costumes made of plastic waste. We want to raise awareness to the global plastic crisis and talk about its issues and some overreaching solutions. As a part of our conversation today, we will be hosting a series of panelists. Today we've got 5 with us: Svenja Angenet, Aikins Ablorde, Yasha Mela, and Yuyun Ismawati Dvega. So each panelist will be introduced by me, and then there will also be a short talk following. A short talk by them following my presentation. After everyone presented their topic, we will also open a round of discussions in which I, the panelists, and people commenting on the chat can contribute. So without no further ado, I would like to present to you Svenja Angenet. She is a geoscientist and researcher with a strong background in climate and marine science and plastic pollution. She has worked for different NGOs and for Greenpeace Germany as a volunteer coordinator and engagement campaigner since 2017. With the Greenpeace agenda, she fights global challenges such as plastic pollution and climate change. So, Svenja, will you tell us what we will be talking about today?
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Svenja. Happy that you are all here to hear about the problem of the global plastic pollution. I'm very happy to work with Greenpeace on this issue already for a couple of years. And it's also one of my very passions to work on the health of the oceans, but also on the environment. And I'd like to share my presentation with you. So 1 second. So I hope that you can see my presentation now. Does it work? And maybe someone give me a feedback?
Yeah, it is working.
Perfect.
As far as I can see, yes.
Okay, great. So as you all probably know and have heard of is that, plastic pollution is really one of the biggest problems we have that we are facing on a global scale, not only for the environment, but also for the climate and also for our health. And the picture that you can see is one of my favorite pictures actually for plastic pollution, although it's of course a bit sad to see it, but for me, it really symbolizes the problem that we have with the plastic pollution. So we are facing the problem really everywhere in the world. We all know and have seen all the pictures from trash that is polluting the beaches, that is floating around in the oceans, that we can find in the jungle, but also we have been finding plastic particles in the very remote areas of our world, such as the Arctic oceans, for example, but also we have found plastics in our bodies, even in our blood. So it's really everywhere, and it's threatening all the living animals and human beings on this planet really by their health, and of course complete ecosystems in the oceans, for example. So it's a big problem that we need to tackle. So we have been thinking about what to do with this problem, but first I want to show you some more pictures. Probably you've all seen these very dramatic pictures already before, for example, like birds that are filled up with plastic particles and eventually die from it, or sea mammals whose bodies are full with plastic particles. So we can find this actually by now really everywhere. It's not just a local problem, it's really a global problem, and we have to fix this as soon as possible. So just to give you some numbers, maybe so far already 35 million tons of plastic already ended up in the environment, and 5 to 13 million tons already in the oceans that are floating around. They've already become very tiny particles in the ocean, which are then in the end digested by small animals, by fish in the ocean. They are part of the food chain, and you will never really get it out of the ocean anymore once it's this very small particles. So yeah, it's really a thing that we have to work on and find solutions. And luckily, there are already a lot of really great ideas and plans how to fix this problem. For example, there have been great projects to clean actually the oceans from the plastic pollution. As Greenpeace, we have been working on this also a lot, of course. We've done many cleanups everywhere in the world with our thousands of volunteers. We are still doing this on a regular basis. But we've been thinking about how can we really get to the source of the problem, because that's what we have to do if we really want to change something. So we've been looking at studies about the plastic pollution in the oceans. And just a recent, very interesting study from Spain discovered that 75% of all items in the ocean are just 10 plastic products. So they are mainly packaging and takeaway items. So such as containers or cups to take away for drinks and food. And that was really quite interesting to see, because it means that this is something that we have to change. Plastic pollution is obviously really a problem of our lifestyle, of our habit of living, that we buy and we consume and we just throw away. And this is especially true for packaging. So there's really a mismatch, because we use plastic as a packaging for food or for a drink, something that we use up really quickly, but plastic is made to last for more than 100 years, several hundred years even. So it doesn't really make sense, and it's something we have to change. Here is again very interesting graphic from the study, where again you can see what are the most items we can actually find in the oceans. And as you can imagine, of course, plastic bags are really number one found in the oceans, but also plastic bottles and food containers and cutlery we can find very often. So that's something we have to change. One interesting aspect also, for example, in Germany, there was a survey recently which discovered that in Germany, most people, they don't want to use this kind of packaging. They don't want to use plastic. But they really don't have any other choice so far. So that is also really a mismatch. And what we have to do to change it is that at one hand, we have to put some pressure on the politics to really change the whole society, and also to give some limits to the companies, which we do, for example, by petitions. And luckily, it's moving forward slowly. For example, in Europe, we have the plastic ban since last month. So already some of the items that I used, like single-use plastic, are banned already. That's a good step, but still, it's just a very tiny step, and we have to do much more. And what we are working on is the reuse revolution. This is our answer to the waste of plastics and the single-use plastic, which we use in such a big way. And the idea of this revolution is that we are like a bottom-up movement, moving forward towards a packaging-free and plastic-free society, and that we use renewable or reusable containers instead of plastic packaging. And I would like to share a video with you. I hope this does work, because that will show you or give you an idea what this reuse revolution is about. Okay, so as you saw, that's our answer really, to stop using single-use plastic and use reusable material. And to make this easier for people to establish in their daily life, we have created a map, the Reuse Revolution map. You can find it online. So far, it's only for Germany, unfortunately, but we are planning to extend it to other countries as soon as possible. So it's basically a map where you can find out where in your neighborhood you can go shopping without packaging, which markets, which supermarkets or stores do offer which items without packaging. So this really makes it easier for people to go shopping without plastics, using less plastics. And this way we can support this movement of zero waste heroes on an everyday basis. And this is really change a lot, at least we hope. So we've launched this map last year with our volunteers, and we get great support and see that people really want to do something, but they don't know how to establish this kind of plastic-free life in their daily life. So we try to help them, and the map is one of our answers. And we hope that this will be more and more easier also in future to find stores that offer packaging-free items. So that's just one aspect. Of course, we are still working on other aspects to tackle the problem of plastic pollution. But that's one of very good projects, I think. So that was an overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Are you going to say something, Svenja? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and the project looks great. And thank you for the nice insights and for being with us today. So, of course, you talked about pollution in the sea, and now we are switching to biodiversity with Aikins Ablorde. I will be introducing him shortly. Yeah. So Aikins is a PhD researcher with the Center for International Health at the LMU Munich. So he's working as a researcher and he investigates insects of medical importance. He leads an establishment that is developing the prototype for the recycling of plastic into building materials for indigenous rural areas in West Africa. And he has also chaired a number of forums on plastic waste and climate change, and was a key member and moderator of the Climate Change Symposium at the LMU. So, Aikins, won't you introduce your topic for today?
Okay, so Giuseppe, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm humbled and honored. And Svenja, thanks for that nice presentation. That was so insightful. So now let the conversation continue. So I'm an entomologist by training, just as Giuseppe has already introduced. I specialize in insects of medical importance for the planet. And I have a number of projects running in Ghana, West Africa, and I'm an environmental enthusiast. So we get rolling, just like it's been already said. I'm presenting on biodiversity. So I'm gonna bring a little bit of my insect science here, and I will entreat everybody to take a number of mental trips in order to be caught into this. You would have to follow the conversation so closely. Okay, so biodiversity. Let's get a textbook meaning of a biodiversity. It can be defined as a variety of plant and animal life in the world or in a particular habitat, a high level of which is usually considered to be very important and desirable. Let's take note of the two keywords, important and desirable. So when we observe the biosphere and we look at the living things on it, we are talking of humans, we are talking of plants, we're talking of life in the water, that's the marine, we're talking of life in air, and say life on land. So every living thing makes up this biological environment. Okay, and just to give a little bit of recap about what we are talking about and the plastic menace at hand. So it's known that global production of plastics have grown 20-fold. That's from 15 million metric tons in 1964 to 311 metric tons in 2015. And this is research by the European Union. This was published in the year 2015. So the question is, plastic tons from 15 million metric tons to 311 metric tons. That's too enormous. So what does this do to their lives on the planet? It impacts them. So we have lives on water, lives on land, lives in the air. So just to get straight to the ball rolling, the direct impact of this can be felt. So let's first talk about the marine, the sea. So in the sea, microplastics find their way into the bottom of the sea, and this is sifted or consumed by the lives in the sea. So once they consume this, it gets to the gut of these sea animals as fish. So what does it do? In biology, or in basic biology, we all know of the long food chain. So once the fish consumes it, other bigger fishes will consume it, and it will eventually end up in the giant fishes or with us humans. This is known as the bioaccumulation of plastics or microplastics in our body. What does it do? The end product we all know. You would end up in the hospital Remember, it's a focus on biodiversity, so it's really going to be like what biology here. So when we speak of how it happens to other parts of the world, for example, I'm using West Africa as a very clean case study. In Africa here, plastics are just thrown about anyhow because the regulations are poor, and there is a little bit of political interference in terms of this, because whichever leader would like to be hard on the people wouldn't be elected into office again. So the political leaders or policy makers have relaxed the whip a bit on the disposal of plastics, and all these plastics find their way into the drainage system. Once the drainage system is choked, when with the temperature in Africa, it becomes a very good breeding ground for mosquitoes. I am an insect scientist and I specialize in mosquitoes. To be specific, Aedes aegypti. So these choked water with plastic become so good an environment. So we call them, so over here in Africa, we call it the mosquito 5-star hotel. When you hear the mosquito 5-star hotel, you would have to know they're talking of the choked plastics and the gutter. The mosquito love it so much. And what do they do? That's why malaria is still a problem here. That's why chikungunya is still a problem here. That's why yellow fever is still a problem here, because these vectors act as the carriers of diseases, and that is their breeding grounds. So we realize that although plastic may not impact directly on humans, this is one of the gates or one of the transportations by which the accumulation of plastics unworthily or unlawfully end up in affecting humans. And this disease, and it's still known that these vectors account for 17% of the world diseases. They account for 70% of the disease conditions in the world. Okay, so when we talk of the life in the sea again, we are talking of the increased accessibility of corals to the disease, especially species favored by reef and other organisms. This poses a long-term problem to the ecosystem under the water. The marine ecosystem is hit highly by this. Also, we have the entanglement of the larger plastics with some of the species in the sea. Once there is accumulation of plastics, these fishes get stuck in the sea. And also, some of these fishes consume this microplastic. What does it do? It enters the body of the fish and it inhibits growth. So we do not have our fishes growing to a large extent, or we do not have the full growth of our fishes, and it can still be traced to the indiscriminate or improper disposal of this plastic waste. And to even take the conversation to a higher level, is it a matter of improper disposal of plastic waste, or it's a matter of too many plastic being produced? You think through it, it's a coin with two sides. But interestingly, these two sides are so slippery because when you slack down the production of the plastic, does that mean the usage will also be reduced? No. So if we want to tackle this, we want to tackle it hand in hand. But the fact still hold that we want to talk about the effect of biodiversity. The effect the biodiversity gets from too much plastic pollution, we cannot talk about all in just a jiffy or all in just a session. We would need a much more huge platform with a lot of time. Also, there's introduction of hazardous substances into the marine food chains, as plastics are able to transfer toxins through the food chain to humans, and it ends up in the health facility once it accumulates over time. Also, in the water. Plastic takes a very long time to degrade. So these non-degradable or nearly non-degradable plastics are able to survive for a long time. They then become carriers or vectors of other bacteria. And once they float and travel along the coastal beach or the coastal train, they transport other bacteria, which we call invasive species. These invasive species are carried to other ecosystem or other biological environment, and they go and destroy the environment because they are in their unnatural environment. As such, they disturb other biomes and eco war system there. As already said, when we want to talk about plastic waste and its effect on biodiversity, we would need a lot of time. So without much ado, this is just a brief introduction and a brief gist about how plastic waste affects the ecosystem around us. In other words, our biodiversity. Thank you, and Giuseppe, you may take over.
Thank you so much, Aikins. I think this is a very important topic for today. The situations we're living. So it's a very important topic. So it's also related to our situation we're living the last years. So next, now we will have to move to Yasha Mela, who works with Wild Plastic, a startup from Hamburg with a mission to free the world from plastic pollution. Yasha works together with collection organizations, and the Wild Plastic processes the collected plastic into recyclable products. So Yasha is also responsible for the impact assessments at Wild Plastic, and he will be presenting his topic to us today. Yasha.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my presentation. I think you should see it now. Could you give me a brief feedback? You can
yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay, great. So like Giuseppe said, I'm Yasha from Wild Plastic, and like I think everybody who's in this panel and also watches the panel knows all those dystopian pictures of like plastic mountains and plastic everywhere. And we as Wild Plastic said, okay, we want to do something against it and want to free the world from the plastic pollution. And yeah, we came up with the question, okay, how much plastic is in the environment? And we knew it was huge and it was very much plastic in the environment, but we found some data that shows that it's a huge amount of plastic in the environment. In a study published in the Science mag, they say it's, as of 2015, approximately 6.3 billion tons of plastic waste have been generated, and only 9% of which had been recycled, 12% was incinerated, and 79% was accumulated in landfills and the natural environment. And like in a total amount of 8.3 billion tons, metric tons of plastics produced since the 1950s. And that's a huge amount of plastic. And we asked ourselves, okay, what of this plastic is in the environment? And we had the experience that like almost everything that is produced ends up in the environment when there's not a proper recycling system. And like almost every kind of waste ends up there or gets burned, no matter if it's single-use plastic or not. We know that like most of the plastic is single use, but there are also bucket, cans, and tires everywhere. And like Aikins also pointed out, this has devastating consequences for wildlife and also for us humans. And yeah, our experience is that everything that has no value is not recycled and not picked up, and people don't really care about it. And so most of the waste has no value, and that means it gets landfilled or burned. And often the waste is not recycled, despite the fact that we have way too much plastic out there. The plastic that we have is, like I said, not recycled, and also most of the times not even recyclable. And so there's no really market for most of the plastic because it don't really has a value. And like virgin plastic is too cheap and you have to pick it up and so on. So basically for many of the plastic that lays around is no market. And so nobody really wants to collect and buy it. And we had a closer look at what is collected, because everybody knows like the ocean plastic claims and so on. But in our experience, only the PET bottles get collected. And there's a study from Southeast Asia that shows that PET bottles like bring way more money or have a way higher price than, for example, the sachets. And yeah, so basically the sachets or the foil plastic is not really collected from the environment. And as you can see, there's a huge difference if you're a collector and like collect the PET bottles. You earn around $4.56 a day, and if you would collect the sachets or the foil plastic, it's like $42 a day. And yeah, also there's no real infrastructure to recycle the foil plastic, and that's a quite big problem because the foil plastic is the plastic that's gets blown away very fast and is also consumed by animals quite often. And for example, PET bottles stay longer at the same place, and the sachets get blown away. So basically, we asked some collection organizations, just like the Plastic Bank and Plastics for Change or Empower, could we give more plastic a value? And basically, they already managed to give the PET bottles greater value. So we asked them whether we could also do it for the sachets. And yeah, we are currently trying to do that and to convert the plastic that is, or the sachets that we collect, into products. So there's a market for that, and if people want to collect it, they get a proper price. But there are also some challenges. So we have to put a huge amount of work into this. So not only the collection, but also we are doing the recycling, and we can't do it in the polluted areas because there is no recycling infrastructure for sachets, or not enough recycling infrastructure. And so basically we have to ship it and regranule it. And with that, we can do products out of it. And the product that we are making out of the collected foil plastic are actually trash bags from collected plastic. And so this is our first product that we with which we want to give the foil plastic a value back. And yeah, so this is one kind of a solution that or one part of a solution that we think can lead to less plastic in the environment. And yeah, I'm quite happy to talk to you guys, because I'm quite interested what we are going to hear further on in this panel. And yes, thank you, Giuseppe, for having us here, and I'm quite thrilled for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Yasha, for being here and for the presentation and for talking about this project with us. So we will move to the next panelist. That would be Jane Patton, who is a campaign manager for plastics and petrochemicals with the Center for International Environmental Law, CIEL. Her work focuses primarily on policy and practice to eliminate pollution along the full life cycle of plastics, with a focus on reducing harm and increasing justice. So, Jane, why don't you start? Do you also have a presentation for today?
I do, and I am going to share my screen quickly. And this should work. Oh, is it
I think
flashing?
it's working.
Okay, excellent. So I am so glad to be here with you guys today. Thank you so much for having me on this incredible panel. I am actually going to talk about some of the things that are happening upstream and in outside of just the plastic waste stream that was covered by some of the previous panelists. So I am honored to be joining everyone today from South Louisiana in the United States, which is in the South Central US. We are, unfortunately, there's a lot of concentration of plastic production here in Louisiana. So what the local communities here, this is a picture of a march that we did 2 years ago, actually wearing protective masks for our health before we were all required to wear them in the context of the pandemic, because we are actually facing an onslaught of air pollution here in Louisiana from plastic production as part of the entire fossil fuel supply chain. And I wanted to talk through with folks today, what are the impacts of that and what does that actually mean for us? So beyond just the waste issue, plastic pollution is actually a significant and growing threat to the climate. 99% of the plastics that we make today are derived from fossil fuels and fossil fuel products. So when we talk about responsibility for the climate crisis, we often, there are visible logos that all of us recognize for the companies that are responsible for the climate crisis. Y'all, those are the same companies that are responsible for the plastics crisis. ExxonMobil, actually, one of their largest plastic production facilities is just down the street from where I was born, which is actually only a few miles from where I live right now. I am one of millions of people who live in this cradle of plastic production in the United States, and even more millions around the world. And this is sort of the genesis, the origin of plastic pollution, long before it ever becomes visible marine and environmental pollution that we have to talk about. Yasha mentioned earlier the amount of plastic production that's more than 350 million tons per year at this point, and that number is growing. Part of the reason why it's so hard to actually know exactly how much plastic is being made is because it's growing. In fact, by 2025, production capacity is expected to grow by more than a third for the most common kinds of ethylene and propylene. And when we're already making 350 million tons a year, growing by more than a third is a lot. And if that production is allowed to expand in the way that the industry plans, it will lock us in for many decades into cheap disposable plastic production. We do not want that unequivocally, not just because it is an environmental concern and a visual blight. It's also just not economical. The reason why there's such an explosive growth in plastics right now is because oil and gas companies that are seeing their traditional product be increasingly not well regarded in not just the environmental space, but in the global policy space generally. As the demand for burnable fossil fuels goes down, oil and gas is seeing petrochemicals as their future source of revenue. And what that has meant is sort of an overreaction in the market. Already, we are producing much more plastic than the world is actually demanding at a level that is getting to a crisis point. And that overcapacity is expected to end up being many millions of tons of plastic per year. And not only is that overcapacity a problem for the environment, it's also a problem for the economy. Because if you have overproduction of any product, it drives down the price, it hurts the market. And it certainly hurts communities that depend on these markets, and it can send it into a spiral and a tailspin. And in the face of an economic crisis already lasting much longer than anyone anticipated from the pandemic, the last thing we want is another destabilizing force in the market, and certainly in a global market like plastics. But beyond the economic question, plastics are also a problem for the climate, and they're a problem for public health. Last year or 2 years ago, CL and its partners did a series of reports that really profiled these two issue areas around climate and health. And what we found is that along the entire plastic life cycle, greenhouse gases are emitted and toxic pollutants are emitted at every stage of the life cycle. That's from the fossil fuel extraction, pulling the oil and gas out of the ground, moving it to the plastic production facilities. That's then superheating it, adding chemicals to it in the production and manufacturing process. That's greenhouse gases and toxic pollutants emitted in the disposal of plastic waste, whether that's recycled, whether it's landfilled, whether it's incinerated, or whether it's lost to the environment. And of course, that ongoing environmental impact also has greenhouse gases. Plastics emit methane and other forms of greenhouse gases as they break down in the environment. This is a crisis. And when we look at the existing climate crisis to do with plastics and the fact that they want to grow plastic production, it becomes very clear that our annual plastic production and its intentions for growth are seriously threatening our ability to keep global temperature rise under 1.5 degrees. We are seeing a massive escalation in emissions from plastics. And what does that mean in hard numbers? If we allow the plastic production to grow in the way that the industry wants it to, it's the equivalent of bringing online in the next 30 years more than 600 new coal-fired power plants. Y'all, we are falling all over ourselves to shut down coal. Why are we allowing the plastics industry to bring online something that will be just as polluting as coal in massive numbers? We shouldn't be allowing that, is the conclusion to take from that. And of course, the issue with coal is also not just climate, it is also a health issue. And we are seeing that reflected in the issues with plastic and plastic production as well. Again, at every stage of the plastic life cycle, we find toxic emissions and toxic pollutants. People are breathing in, we are eating and drinking, we are absorbing through contact with our skin. Chemicals and additives in plastics and the materials used to make them that are having serious detrimental health impacts. And what I mean when I say that, let's talk specifics. I'm talking about asthma, obesity, early onset puberty in children, hyperactivity. I'm talking about low birth weight in babies, diabetes, obesity, infertility in adults. We're talking about various kinds of cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, thyroid disorders. If we look at the epidemics, the patterns in public health crises over the last 30 years, as plastic production and use has gone up, so have all of these related health disorders. And of course, the human health impacts are not the only things we have to worry about. Aikins went through the biodiversity impacts on the full suite of global species, whether they be animal or plant. We are facing a massive toxicity crisis from plastics that in many ways is still very invisible. That's a lot of bad news. The good news is there are actually lots of things that we can do to keep our trees and our communities and our babies safe. There are policies that we can take on at the global, at the national and regional, and at the local levels. And some of those policies are already moving. We're seeing at the global level a very fast moving conversation about a new global treaty to address the plastics pollution crisis that is about centralizing coordination, that is about ensuring there's monitoring and reporting and baseline data, comparative data that's being taken, and to ensure that there are plastic pollution prevention plans that are being undertaken at the national and regional level that focus on reducing and mitigating these harms and reducing production down to reasonable levels and with no emissions or toxicity. We're also seeing significant movement at the national and regional level. I believe earlier, Svenja mentioned the Single-Use Plastics Directive in the EU. We're also seeing a national legislation in the US around the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. We're seeing Rwanda with quite a comprehensive set of anti-plastic and zero waste laws. India is moving to phase out single-use plastics by next year. There are many contexts in which this work needs to be done, including to do things like support the folks that Yasha talked about whose livelihoods depend on a very unfortunate supply of single-use plastics. We've got to figure out how we make this transition in a way that is supportive of humans and human health. And then, of course, there are a number of things we can do at the local level. We can adopt resolutions towards zero waste. We can incentivize businesses to go package free, to go plastic free. We can adopt bans or fees on the most unnecessary forms of plastics. And we can demand that political leadership stop supporting new plastic production. And that can happen anywhere, even if you don't live in the city where the plastic plant is being built. If you live in the water table, if you live nearby, if you're going to breathe the air downwind from that facility, you can participate in the conversation about stopping plastic production. Because building on something that Svenja said earlier, to stop plastic pollution, we've got to stop using and we have to stop making plastic because we deserve better than this. We have a right to clean air and water, and we have a right to health. Making, using, and burning plastic does not respect or protect those rights. And it is time for us to stop throwing more Band-Aids on the solution and instead build something much better, much more comprehensive. And with that, I will hand it back over to our facilitator for today. And I thank you guys for having me on this panel.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you so much for this very detailed presentation. It was so insightful. And so thank you for joining us today. So moving on to the next panelist, to the last one, Yuyun Ismawati Derwiega. Did I pronounce it correctly, Yuyun?
No problem. Derwiega.
Derwiega, I'm so sorry. Okay, so Yuyun has more than 25 years of experience in environmental health. Before she started working in the NGO sector in 1996, she worked as a freelance consultant for different environmental projects. She's the co-founder of Bali Focus, which later became the Nexus 3 Foundation. And she's also the founder of various NGO networks. She's a steering committee member of Break Free from Plastics and an ambassador of the Earth Project. She also received a Goldman Environmental Prize in 2009 for her works on pollution and wastes. So, Yuyun, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you, Giuseppe. Okay, let me share my Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for having me today. It's very interesting topic and discussions, and thank you for all speakers before me, so I can have it's easier for me to say and share what I want to say. Okay, this is just a brief introduction about myself. I can skip it. I would like to start with this the statement made by Monica. She's the executive secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So she said, this is about a couple of months ago, that we are witnesses of a vicious circle where climate change increases the releases of hazardous chemicals while being exacerbated by them. So it's true that now we are still producing chemicals and pollutants, but at the same time, the climate change also make it worse. Climate change can lead also to increased releases of hazardous chemicals into the environment, which was previously trapped in glacier, permafrost, and the ocean ice, especially POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and mercury. And most of, I would like to take you to the chart on the left. It's researchers also found that the legacy of the past pollutions released in the North America and Europe, its anthropogenic emissions, accounted for 24% of present-day deposition. And 30% of the surface ocean mercury. So I'm bringing up mercury here because of the coal fire power plants and all the industrial emissions that was released into the air, the atmosphere, ended up or deposited or landed in the ocean and in the soil. And also 81% of the anthropogenic mercury in the deep ocean originated from the emissions pre 1900, which is the gold rush era. So if we look at mercury like this, we can also correlate it with other chemicals that was released to produce plastics and other things. And 5 threats to biodiversity, according to this report of the World Economic Forum, mainly land and sea use change, and then pollution, and then species overexploitation, climate change, and invasive species and diseases. So for I would like to highlight the pollution here because I'm working mostly on pollution and toxic chemicals, and this is one of the key component of that affecting our life and the sustainable future. Pollution is also a key driver to biodiversity loss. And there are 4 conventions that are currently addressing chemicals and waste pollution that not only benefited human life, but also biodiversity and conservation. Basel Convention is talking about the transboundary movement of waste and hazardous waste. And then Stockholm Convention is controlling persistent organic pollutants. And then Minamata Convention is dealing with mercury. And Rotterdam Convention is dealing with the prior informed consent of transfer and trade of hazardous substances. Pollution also kills 60% of death globally. So, causes death 16% globally. And pollutions, what I mean with pollutions here is not only air pollutions, but also soil and air, water pollutions and air pollution. It's 16% of death worldwide caused by pollutions. So it's 3 times more than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And even the study shows that it's 15 times more than war. So what kind of pollutions that kills? It's heavy metals, persistent organic pollutants, plastic additives, and then highly hazardous pesticides, chemicals in electronics, and then chemicals used in fracking and unconventional gas, and also unintentional products. In the chart, it shows the hazard ranking of plastic additives. That the pink one is showing the data gaps that at the state of as of now. So we know more about flame retardant. There are more studies about it, and then also about the pigment and antioxidant, but very little information about the UV stabilizer and then other things. But also the hazardousness of these plastic additives. Already identified that additives that made plastics like you see now, soft or shiny or strong, mainly really depending on the additives that use. I would like to highlight a little bit about the Center of Plastic Production, which is, thank you, Jane, for bringing up your location. Unfortunately, globally, actually, it was Asia. It is Asia that's the major producer of plastics. And unfortunately, Asia also imported almost more than half of plastic waste globally, mainly to China until 2018. And then after that, it was distributed to the surrounding countries, Southeast Asia and other countries of Asia. And in 2020, the plastic production reached about 367 million tons. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff that to be dealing with, and of course, one country cannot solve it. So from the chart on the left, you can see that from 2018, the plastics waste has been distributed to other countries. So previously, it was sent to China and Hong Kong. And then after China issued the new regulations, all the waste from mostly developed countries sent to China and also to other Southeast Asian countries. I put the title here, Broken Recycling, because as mentioned earlier by Jasha and I think it was Svenja also mentioned that the plastic recycling was only 9%. So why is it very small and very low? Some studies also shows that some developed countries already have only small portion of mismanaged plastic waste. If I look at this map and then see in Asia, there are more reds than in Europe or in America even. But really, is it true that the plastic waste mismanaged in developed countries are less than in Asia? Well, you can see some of them also being transferred to Asian countries. So it's not really managed or solved in that region. And all this waste, that mismanaged waste, also not only polluting the water, but also the ocean. And as study said, and Svenja also said before, that more plastics in the ocean than the fish. This is the projection is scary. So I have concern for my grandson. So the transfer of plastics from one country to another country also bring all the toxics to, or transfer the toxic plastics to developed countries. And when I conducted the study since 2015, 2016, I found out more and more that the recycling that was expected by the traders actually not really recycled. So it's ended up in the environment and burned by the communities like this, chicken running around in the piles of plastics. So it's not really recycled. Maybe only small portion of that waste being transferred to developing countries are recycled, but the rest of it, I think it's ended up in the environment and in our food chain. So we collected chicken eggs, the one that you saw before running around. So we collected the eggs from the chicken huts nearby the dumping area, and we found high concentrations of dioxins. PCDD is dioxins, came from burning plastics or in incomplete combustions or incinerator. So anything being burned and potentially containing chloride or PVC, it will release dioxin. So we found high concentrations of dioxins in eggs that's supposed to be zero, and also flame retardants, and that's also found in many places. We also collected fish from 5 locations in Indonesia. The study is we are planning to release it around next month because we are still finalizing the manuscript. But we collected it from 6 locations in Indonesia and 1 river. And you can see here that the microplastics abundance in the individual fish samples are quite high. And more than 50% of the samples have microplastics in their guts or inside the fish gills. So the plastics, the colors of plastics also interesting to see that in the river there are more dark plastics and in the oceans more blue and transparent plastics. And not only in the fish, but we also found plastics in the soil. There are a lot of studies already, and soil inside soil. If you are a soil enthusiast, there are lots of microbes and worms live in the soil that we can't see. That it's sad to see that the high concentrations of toxic chemicals or plastics additives also found in worms and inside the soil. What about the air? So there are several studies already shows that microplastics are airborne. So it's not only COVID airborne or the emissions, coal emissions. Apparently, microplastics also airborne. And there are several studies already shown that tiny microplastics also entered our lungs. And that's also cause or triggered other kind of diseases, including cancer. And even more scarier, it's inside human placenta. I'm not going to go further, but it's scary to see that the microplastics also can pass the blood barrier. Last one, this is the new study that just released early this year by Dr. Shanna Swan and Stacy Colino, showing the decreasing sperm count in mainly in the developed countries. And their calculations, the projection is that by 2045, the sperm count will be reaching 0. So that's why I put the title, The Disappearing Male, because all the pollutions and the toxic chemicals, especially endocrine disruptor chemicals that commonly found in plastics, are really affecting the reproductive health of men and women. And as as the previous speakers also said, that the biodiversity also affected. So scientists also found some species are not easy to reproduce and consider as endangered species because they cannot replicate quickly. And this is concerning because the contaminants or the toxic chemicals change the genetic and also can pass to the next generations. So what kind of sustainable future that we can offer to my grandson? I always think about him every time I do my presentations and do my reports. Some initiatives and also global agreements like the Stockholm Conventions already remove some harmful chemicals. That's the good news. But it's still a lot of things to do and long list to agree with. And then the replacement of that harmful chemicals also should be tested before they sell to the market, because for chemicals, certain chemicals, most of you knows that it's not immediately, we can't immediately see the impact, so it will take time. But it's also important to regulate and control harmful chemicals and then redesign everything, including the end of life in the design. And then monitoring our environment and biomarkers are very important to see how far we are progressing. And the most important thing is that we do our bits today for the future. I would like to end it there so we can have more conversation. Thank you for listening. I will handing it over to Giuseppe.
Thank you so much, Yuyun, and thank you so much, everyone, again, for being here today. Yeah, though this were some very interesting and insightful presentations you just showed. So now I would like to start with some questions from the people who are watching us. And I will start with the first one to Yasha. So I will just read the question from the comments here. So would you say it is possible to create a market for recyclable products mainly based on ideology? Like, for example, with consumers becoming more aware of the plastic crisis?
I don't think that we can only do it with that. I think we need, like all areas, we need the political area, we need the consumers, but we also need the companies. But I think we have to go further on the global treaties and so on, because there's not enough yet. It's this week that some of the biggest polluting companies started like an initiative to regulate more on the global scale, but in regarding to plastic pollution and how to declare it and so on. So basically, I think we need more regulation there, and yeah, so basically all areas. But I think we have to strongly push the political leaders, because like they can do greater change than consumers, because like they are in a weak position compared to the companies and so on.
And I have two thoughts to add to that. So the first is that consumer demand is actually not what's driving plastic production, period. People are not out there saying, you know what I really need? A plastic bottle. What's happening is that the oil companies who see first of all, the creation of plastic originally was an effort by oil and gas companies to make money off of their waste product. Plastic is made out of the waste product of oil refinement. And as that has changed over time since the 1950s, when consumer plastics were first really hitting the market, Exxon now sees, I think someone asked about is it right to understand that as Exxon sees, or not just Exxon, but as oil and gas companies see the demand for their fossil fuels going down, they see plastics as their sort of future profits, their future viability? That is the right way to think about it. And that is absolutely how they're thinking about it. That is very evident in market analyses. They're not even hiding that. It's just not publicly known. And they spend quite a lot of ad money in making us believe that the problem is consumer choice, that the problem is people mismanaging or not putting their plastics in the right place. As you might be able to hear, I have a little boy in the background who's going to be 5 later this month. And the second point I wanted to make is that my little boy eats a lot of peanut butter. And when I go to the store, because I understand the toxics that come out of plastics, because I understand the thing that drives the plastics market, I make the choice to buy peanut butter in a glass jar instead of a plastic jar. The glass jar is twice the price of the plastic jarred peanut butter. When we are asking billions of people around the world to make individual choices that are economically harmful to them, that is not a choice. That is not something that the consumer market can actually have an effect on without, as Yasha pointed out, political decision makers having the will to make those decisions. And it is about time that we stop making people feel responsible for the fact that plastic is not being recycled, for the fact that they can't afford the peanut butter in the glass jar, because they're not the ones driving that problem. And we really have to focus on both the countries and also, frankly, the companies that are causing that problem to begin with.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure. I was going to ask you if, you can add something if you wish.
Thank you. Because I do totally with you, Jane, and also with Yasha, of course, there needs to be some regulations on the companies that actually produce this plastics 100%. But I also think that to some degree, we actually as consumers can contribute to the change, at least on a smaller scale, because I can see it actually now here in Germany that now the zero waste stores are growing and growing, and they pop up more and more, and it becomes actually a topic. People talk about it, and more people become aware of it, and actually can start to reduce their plastic use every day. And as it becomes more easy to ban plastics or plastic products in your daily life, I think we can actually make some change as individuals, because then companies see, okay, maybe it becomes efficient to offer also zero waste options or to open a zero waste store somewhere. And in that way, we can just change as a society, maybe. And that will also put some political pressure, I think, on the decision makers. I don't think we should, of course, also focus on political decisions and also on the companies, but I think it's also the idea of changing our mindset and our lifestyle is an important part of that.
Okay, so can I add a bit? So we all know before mobile phones were invented, we had telephones in our homes. Before the telephone was invented, people looked for means to get information across to people. Okay, so before plastic was invented, what were we doing? I know what the argument will be put forth, that it's going to be expensive to go back to life without plastics. But if we have the planet at heart, and we understand the dynamics that go into our lives and the life of the biological entities we have around us, we should be hard on ourselves in order to curb the use of this plastic. I am of the view we can go back to life with very little or no plastic at all. It should be possible. But come again, or think of it again, the lawmakers, the policy makers, they have all the power. Whatever they decree is what goes into the people. Well, taking it from my part of the world, in West Africa here, a lot of these plastic companies are owned by politicians. A lot of these plastic companies are owned by people who have money and decide for the government. So the question is, how can science win the argument here? Since it always rests in the bosom of the politician. The politician explains how the people should live. The rich man goes to the politician or the policy maker and he tells him, hey, for me to give you this to add to your economy, you need to do this. But I personally believe we can live a life without plastics. But it all rests with our lawmakers.
That's such a good point, Aikins. Thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Aikins. And I also have a question for you, if I may ask. So, of course, policymakers are what causes the problem here, but do you also think it would be good for people to participate to protests or manifestations in order to put pressure on them, like we saw last year's? Do you think this is also an important factor?
It's very, very important, but in this scenario, we need to think about the geographical location and the political instability. Because at some part of the world, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, you do not have a lot of freedom to protest. The freedom to protest is only on paper. Of course, you could go to seek a preamble in order to protest. But the thing is, before the protest ends, there's a lot of victimization, there's a lot of backbiting, there's a lot of name calling, and it's going to sideline you in terms of everything. So the protesting thing to the leaders is only on paper, but practically at some parts of the world, this may not help. But I think for the advanced economics and the advanced part of the world, protesting should be able to like say to some extent solve the problem.
Thank you so much for your answer. Would anybody like to add something to this, or should we move on to the next? Oh, Svenja, yeah, and Yo-Yo.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely think that protest is a good way to put some pressure on political decision makers. I think actually, for example, the ban in Europe, that was also to some part that people are actually starting to protest against it, and that plastic or the problem of plastic pollution became very, or appeared in the media, for example, that people got to know about the problem and they were interested in doing something about it and actually participating in campaigns and things like that. So I think the good political decisions against plastic pollutions are maybe to some part also moved by public pressure. So I think it's really an important tool to do that. In what way? I mean, there are many ways how to organize protest. It may be some demonstrations, or it may be online or petitions or whatever, but I think this is actually really a powerful tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Svenja. And Yo-Yo?
Yeah, I just want to add, based on what Svenja already mentioned, that petitions online and then physical or on the site, on the spot protest should be seen as the way of people expressing their rights. I understand that in some countries, the protesters have been criminalized and seen as the obstruction of development and so on. But I think we should not give up, and that we should keep pushing our government through dialogues, sitting in a room, until on the street or online petitions. It's very important to keep pushing this. Otherwise, government will think that the public is okay with the decisions or with the regulations or with the situation. So it should be seen as the way of expressions to get their rights, the rights to health, the rights to live in a healthy environment. It's very important. And in some countries also, there are some regulations to protect the member of publics who protested, so they will not be criminalized. And it's important nowadays, especially during the pandemic in several countries. During this pandemic, anyone who protested, it will be, sacked by the police and so on. But those people have to be protected. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yuri. So I have another question for Svenja. So you talked about your campaign, and it concentrates primarily on packaging. As we discussed in our previous panels, though, packaging are not the biggest plastic polluters in the world. So my question to you is, why are you concentrating on them in your campaign?
I think the contribution of plastic packaging is actually underestimated. As I showed the figure in my presentation, we can actually find a lot of plastic packaging being a big part of the pollution in the oceans, actually. This can be food containers, for example, or cups, for example, and a lot of items found are, for example, from takeaway food. And I think takeaway food products are really a big part of plastic pollution. And we are focusing on that because we think that's actually an easy way to change something, because packaging, especially for takeaway products, we can just ban them very easily. We can introduce reusable systems. Like there are already some ideas of reusable cup systems where you can go to a cafe and you can order your coffee in a reusable cup and just return it just somewhere in another cafe, for example, which makes it much more easier when you're maybe traveling somewhere and you want to have a cup to coffee to take away, that you can not use plastic but some reusable material. And we would like to have that also for food, for any kind of takeaway food or drinks or packaging also. And if we can actually introduce these kind of systems, I think that we can already ban a lot of plastic pollution that we can find in the oceans. Yeah, that's why we focused on this for now, at least.
Thank you so much, Svenja. Would anyone else like to add something, or?
Yeah, so that's my part of the world. So whatever Svenja just was suggested would be a very interesting one here, because there are even a lot of rivalry between maybe what you said as a coffee companies. To take a cup from one company or coffee shop, you take your coffee in your car whilst driving and drive to a maybe 50 kilometers away to give to another coffee company there and retrieve maybe a €1 or $1 for returning the cup can get a little bit tricky. So that's way of controlling plastics, I think, would only be materialized in the advanced countries where there are a lot of structures and there are a lot of war systems. But we also have a number of few ways of controlling our plastic. For example, the company or organization I standing for Environment, we are into the use of plastic waste to make building materials. So what do? We just take the plastic waste, we apply heat to it. At a particular stage, we then pour sand or natural laterite. We add it into it until a uniform mixture is made, or we get a uniform paste. We then pour this paste into molds. When these are solidified and hard, we retract the molds and we get our bricks. So the molds are shaped in such a way that we get these bricks and they look like Legos, building Legos. So we then fit them together on each other or through the bezels under them to make a wall. So we have the task of making these plastic bricks to make living structures, and we are enrolling it from the rural areas by trying to use it for building markets, for building places of convenience, and for building schools. So this is one of the typical ways in which we've started attacking the menace of plastic, of which I'm a keeper. Yeah.
Thank you, Aikins, for your answer. And I've got another question for you related to your project. So what are the main difficulties you've encountered in your project? So when you talked about making buildings from plastic waste, so what are the main problems or difficulties?
Yeah, so the thing is, the main thing was, so we liaised with the district assemblies and the municipal assemblies. But the main thing was getting the people, the indigenous people, to buy into this idea. These indigenous people are people who are looking for bread and butter. Their economies are very weak. They do not make a lot. So their focus is not on plastic waste or how to get it out of the environment. These are people who are focused on just mere bread and butter. So it's not a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult to let them buy into the idea that even these plastic bricks are cheaper. Because to get a normal 12-foot by 12-foot bedroom from these plastic bricks, so whatever you spend is only a tenth of whatever you would need to construct an equivalent with a cement and block or a concrete structure. You need only a tenth. And even the advantage of this is that these are Legos that can be dismantled at any time to suit your shape of preference. If you need your window in a particular direction or you need your door in a particular direction, these can be done at any time, which the concrete buildings do not have. But the people are not buying into this. That is the main problem.
I'm concerned about the application of eco bricks and Legos and other applications where we are using plastic waste to make building materials, because I mentioned that, and Yuyun mentioned this as well, that there are toxic additives present in plastics, and if those plastics are if they are if heat is applied to them in any way, including from the sun, they are much more likely to off gas. It's why the inside of your car smells the way that it does when it sits in the sun. It's why Teflon, the nonstick coating they put on pots and pans that you cook with, has been known to actually cause adverse health effects in small animals, in small pets, and why it creates air pollution in your house. Is because plastics are full of toxic additives. And I'm concerned that when we talk about plastics being, even if it is a small percentage of what goes into the materials to build eco bricks or to use plastic bottles in housing and things like that, that we are then actually subjecting a poorer population of the world to more extraction and more harm by trying to tout this and push these as a solution. This is why I think it's important for us to actually look holistically at, what are the applications and solutions where we are both ensuring that people have housing, ensuring that they have safe places to live, and also making sure that the materials we are using to build that housing are actually safe. And I'm concerned that they're not. And by continuing to have this conversation about applications for how we can use collected waste or plastic waste without actually doing that in the context of also lowering production, also changing global supply chains, I think we continue to give corporations cover for false solutions. And I hear you, Aikins, on the need that we need to have housing. We have to figure out what to do with all this trash that currently exists. But I also think it's important that we not just sort of push that harm down the road to a later, to be addressed later in time. I just feel like we're just going to keep sort of chasing our tails around this issue if we're not actually looking at it systemically from the start.
Yeah, I agree with Jane. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just about to say that we have reports. IPEN produced reports where with Arnica, where we collected various products from all over the world and analyzed it in the laboratory. Several plastic additives and concentrations. We found out that the recycled products that made into toys or dark color that have the highest concentrations of toxic chemicals, especially additives like flame retardant that currently applied in many packaging, and also PFAS, PFOA, that's what they call it, the forever chemicals now. So especially to make it into housing materials, it has to go through a certain test because you don't know how much the chemicals will be leaked, especially if it's in hot temperature areas. And also my concern is the laboratory and infrastructures in developing countries. Many developing countries do not have laboratory with the capacity to analyze toxic chemicals. Even in my country, in Indonesia, we send out samples to Europe because there is no laboratory in Indonesia that can analyze the toxic chemicals in products. But responding to the packaging that related to Svenja, I think it's also important to push for the alternative delivery system. So using sachet, especially for developing countries, no longer good options because they cannot be recycled. Recovery from Plastics just released also a report last month. They call it the missing the mark. We analyzed hundreds of 200 or more projects that claimed by Nestle, PepsiCo, Unilever, and so on as a sustainable project, but actually it failed on the ground. So only 15% of their projects are really shows work on the ground, but the rest of them is just not working. So again, to call for a redesign and alternative delivery system is important to keep pushing and utilizing the waste for packaging or for toys or converting it, especially if it's applying heat. You have to be careful because you don't want the workers, the poor people who wants to work also get toxic exposure. Thank you.
Maybe one thing I would also like to add to the topic of packaging is that, as we talked a lot about toxics, of course, also plastic packaging includes a lot of hazardous toxics. So there have been studies that from the packaging, the toxics are already transferred to the food, whether it may be takeaway food, which, for example, often is heated, so it's even more easier for the toxics to transfer to the food, but also, for example, fruits that you buy in the supermarket that are covered with plastics or other foods, they can be contaminated with the toxics from the plastics. So also from there is coming a health problem, which is also just another reason to actually get away from plastic packaging.
Okay, to just recap on something that Jane said. So our project is still at the prototype stage. A lot of research is still ongoing, and we've taken the emission of smoke as a result of recycling the plastic into enormous concern. So there is a design going on now, a redesigning of the chimney. So we are going to lace the chimney with a reactor to react with the smoke, and we are liaising with a local university here to work on that for us. So the issue of smoke has been considered to its highest threshold, and we are doing something about it. That's why I say we are still at the prototype stage of achieving all these with the plastic bricks.
All right. Well, thank you. And reading from the comments, yeah, maybe this last question to you guys. How can big companies be incentivized to change their supply chains in order to reduce plastic waste? And Florian writes, I doubt there will be a global political consensus in order to make drastic changes. So what is your opinion on that?
So it gets very tricky when at the law court, the judge is the father of the defendant. It gets very tricky. So in this case, these large companies from much of the part of the world are almost owned by the policymakers. So just like I already said, the plastic companies are owned by the politicians. The other plastic companies are owned by the rich men who are also already in bed with the politicians. So making a decision to go against their business is a very tricky one, because they believe the money is supposed to circulate amongst them and not go just anywhere. So making a decision to hurt themselves is a it's a tricky one. But I think in advanced economies, where laws work and leaders can be taken up to do the right things, I think laws can be put in place and the leaders brought to book to be able to alter some part of their supply chain to better the issue of plastic pollution.
Right. Thank you, Aikins. Would anyone else would anyone else like to add something, or?
I think I would like to add something, because I don't think that it's so unrealistic to get a global treaty. We also had the treaty on climate change, so the Paris Agreement, but we shouldn't count on that. That's what I want to point out, is that we also have to pressure companies and governments. And I think one role is to consume other products, to send the signals, but I think the leverage you can have with this is very limited. So I think like civil action, like demonstrations and so on, pressure on the governments will be necessary, because like the consumption leverage is not big enough, but also supporting companies that do it differently. So basically, one of our approaches is that we want to show that a different kind of economy is possible, and that you can make products from recycled material, and you can make them recyclable. And this also pressures, because this goes on the economic scale, and like you can grab something of the big cake of the big companies. And yeah, so basically we have to take action on every level. But I think on the political way, it's the most effective, because it's such a big system into it. And like Jane multiple times pointed out, the plastic industry is not led by the demand, it's led by like the fossil fuel industry, because they need to push their fossil resources into something. So basically, I think political action will be needed, and I think the Paris Agreement on plastic, or in general pollution, will be necessary.
And I also think that as we reflect on changing company supply chains, I mean, I think we're already seeing companies change their supply chains. Just yesterday, I had to go to the pharmacy to get deodorant, and I was able to find deodorant in a package that was not made of plastic. It's like a little paper push thing. I was very excited. And I'm not talking about the like natural deodorant that's made of crystals. I mean, like secret, like name brand deodorant. They came in a container that wasn't made of plastic. Sorry, it's lunchtime. And I was very excited about it, to be able to buy this just at a neighborhood pharmacy. And that already is demonstrating that we are seeing shifts in the supply chain. Now, I will also say there was a wall of deodorant. One option was not in a plastic container. So we still have quite a lot of shifts to go through and differences to see there. And of course, I also just want to point us to the stuff that's visible. The visible supply chain is the packaging that we see on the store shelf. There was a whole lot of plastic that was in that supply chain before it ever got to the store shelf. These things are being wrapped in multiple layers of plastic packaging when they go on pallets, when they're moved on ships and in airplanes. We are actually seeing a huge amount of plastic film being a big part of plastic waste that is never seen or touched by the consumer. When I was younger, I used to work in a clothing store, and every single shirt, every item of clothing in a clothing store is wrapped in its own individual plastic bag. You would be stunned by the amount of plastic that comes out of a high street store before it ever even touches the floor where customers see it. So when I go in and buy a shirt, the shirt's made of cotton, I bring my own bag, I think I'm doing the right thing, but actually a huge amount of plastic was involved in that supply chain before I ever got to make a decision as a consumer. So when we're talking about changing global supply chains, we also have to talk about changing logistics. We have to talk about shipping. We have to talk about moving the transport of goods. We also frankly have to talk about food systems. Because one of the things that we hear time and time again from countries that are involved in this global policy process is, it's all well and good for the UN to negotiate a global treaty, but when the countries that hold lots of power at the UN all have the ability to grow food domestically, and a country that has been subject to colonialism and imperialism and forced into monocropping, where I actually can't grow a sustenance food supply for my citizens and community, I have to import food. And what is that imported food wrapped in? Plastic. And that's something we also have to address, is how are we rethinking and redesigning our food systems? Yuyun mentioned plastics in the soil. How are we making sure that our existing agricultural systems, existing food systems, don't rely on pesticides and fertilizers that have intentionally added plastics as part of their time release systems, which is what fertilizers and pesticides have right now? How are we making sure that our massive agricultural fields are not being covered in plastic mulch? which is what our agricultural fields are being covered in right now. There are so many parts of the supply chain that we have to think about. We have to think about plastics in agriculture. We have to think about plastics in chemicals. We have to think about all the plastics in the consumer supply chain that the consumer never sees and has no control over. And this is where our conversation about policy and our conversation about companies changing their practices and working together are so crucial. And no one part of that is going to change the whole system. We have to be looking at it together at the same time. That is hard, and it takes a long time and a lot of money and a lot of people who are smarter than me and maybe even smarter than all of us. And yet we have to keep doing it, and we have to keep moving forward and putting one foot in front of the other, or we're just going to keep breathing in plastics and eating them and finding them in the water and finding them everywhere in the grocery store. And I wish that I could just say, this is the answer. It's so easy. But if it were easy, we would have figured it out already. And I think that we have to make sure we don't get bogged down by the hard, because we've come up with global policy solutions for hard problems before. For mercury, as Yoon mentioned, for CFCs with the Montreal Protocol. We've done this before. For climate, as Yasha mentioned, we can do it again. And that's what we have to focus on.
Thank you so much, Jane, for the nice speech. Yes, it's very hard, but as you said, we came out of this in the past, so we have to keep on focusing on the whole system. So due to time issues, I won't be able to go over the other comments in the chat. I was really honored to have you here today, and I would also like to thank you, the ones who joined us and who watched us. If you're interested in watching our other panels, you can just find them on our YouTube channel. And we will also be hosting other offline events during our campaign. So I will end the broadcast now. Thank you so much to everyone, and see you soon.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.